me just play you this clip, and it perhaps sums up some of the conversation we were just having before the break. Listen.
Shouldn't be a country where people fear walking down their street. Their TVs showing cars and buildings being set on fire.
Right, so just for the absolute record, I don't want anyone of any persuasion feeling afraid as they're walking down their street. Just for the record, I don't think it's OK to ban places, things, whatever. I think all of that is criminal and it's wrong. However, I cannot help but notice that there's such this focus to, you know, people are afraid to walk down their streets because a car was on fire on telly or whatever. I completely accept that. I agree with that sentiment. It's wrong. I don't want anyone to feel that way. What about the people that are in their local areas that have got these hotels shoved in them without any consultation, by the way? What about those people that have fears about who on earth is it in that hotel when, of course, you hear the stories, and these are not baseless, random, racist weirdos. They're hearing stories such as a 70-year-old guy minding his own business gets murdered by a so-called asylum seeker. They hear those stories. It makes them fearful. Who is addressing those concerns?
Oh, what about the people who watched Abdul Azidi, who came into Britain illegally, who then applied for asylum twice, who sexually assaulted a woman? He then got given asylum when he said he'd converted to Christianity, except everybody around him knew that was fake. And then he went on and he poured acid over a mother and 2 children. These are real-world cases. People aren't making this up. And what I would have said to Keir Starmer is, OK, people are scared looking at the violence and the criminality during the riots. And that's true. And everybody here rejects that violence and criminality. But I think there are lots of people in the country who look at the small boats arriving, who look at the nearly 132,000 people entering Britain illegally, taking the British taxpayer for a complete ride, costing the country £5 to £7 billion every year. And I think they feel scared, mainly young, predominantly Muslim men under the age of 40. I think Brits are saying, why on earth can we not control our own borders? Thomas Sowell, one of my favourite thinkers, once said, immigration laws are the only laws that are discussed in terms of how to help people break them. Right? Isn't that interesting? Immigration laws are the only laws that are ever discussed in terms of how to help people break them. And I think that's what lots of folks out there were thinking and feeling when they were listening to Keir Starmer today. You find that unacceptable, so do we, but we find this unacceptable. Why can't you fix this over here?
But he's just fought and won an election on the basis of very clearly promising to fix both of those things. And if they don't fix it, like, they would be in trouble. There's no doubt about that. It was a very big issue in the election. It's not going away as an issue.
OK, can I just ask one question?
And they understand that.
Can I ask one question? You were a Labour MP, right? So just
a while ago.
Just treat me like an absolute idiot, right? Just from a strategy point of view.
I'll do my best, Matt.
Just from a strategy point of view.
It's going to be hard.
Just from a strategy point of view, right? So you're in Keir Starmer's team. You're looking at all the polling, and it's saying 2/3 of Brits associate the protests and the riots with immigration, right? You're looking at the polling. It's also saying immigration is the #1 issue facing the country. So here's my question. He's given a number of speeches since the riots and the protests. Why hasn't he once mentioned the word immigration? Why has he not once said, I get that this might actually be rooted in people's concerns over what's happening on the borders and with immigration?
Go on.
So I can tell you what I think. I don't know. That they haven't consulted me about this, but as you say, given all that, it's very unlikely indeed that they just forgot, isn't it? It's very unlikely to be an oversight. So what I think is going on is what I was talking about earlier. I think deliberately what they're saying is, if you want to get this issue on the agenda for us, when we're going to have this conversation, it's not going to be because you did, or actually a tiny group of criminals did those really bad things that were actually worse than their individual elements. The sum was worse because it was an attack. I get it. It was an attack on law and order.
Deliberately not addressing people's concerns because a 15-year-old chucked some rocks at police.
No.
Right.
He's saying not because a 15-year-old chucked some rocks at police, right, but because for several nights in a row, for 10 days or so, the the whole question of law and order.
Give over. He started with his far-right nonsense rhetoric. Pretty much the second these things, people started expressing frustration. So he didn't only suddenly end up at this point. Come on.
I think Starmer made it worse, actually.
What?
I think Starmer made the rioting and the protests worse. I really do, by just denouncing everybody as far-right thugs and not saying, 2011, remember those riots? We were allowed to have a great conversation at that time about the legitimate concerns about austerity and public sector cuts. This time around, none of that. Everyone's a criminal, everyone's a thug. We're not talking about the wider issue.
2011, the court sat 24/7 all weekend, banging people up left, right and centre in exactly a very similar way to how they have done this time. There's no...
The public conversation was completely different.
There is...
It was under a Conservative government and the left was falling over itself to say this was about austerity and public sector cuts.